Welcome. You're listening to Broken, Adjust, Heal, a podcast series that shines a light on grief and loss, living with depression and anxiety, and how to be resilient. I'm your host, Stephanie Schaefer. As a former hospice social worker and now a licensed clinical social worker in private practice, I have counseled thousands of grievers and now feel compelled to share what I have learned with the world and with you. Season 1 of Broken, Adjust, Heal is a 7-part podcast series of transformative stories from my life that shattered me to the core and have offered helpful insights to anyone facing life's most difficult challenges. When we go through healing our pain to make us better instead of bitter, it then becomes possible to turn our pain into purpose. Because I believe that we are put on this earth to help each other. Episode 1, Life Lessons from Death. On today's episode, you'll hear a few key lessons that I learned from witnessing sudden death, a slow hospice death, and how those experiences prepared me for when it hit close to home. For all of you who think you didn't make it in time for a loved one's passing, this episode is especially for you. I was born to be a social worker. Dealing with human emotion, when people were happy, when people were sad, when people were disappointed. I just had the capacity to sit with those down emotions. And always wanting to help people figure out resources, practical tools, how to get information. At the beginning of my career as a social worker, right out of graduate school, I became a hospice social worker. I was 27 years old at the time, and my gosh, what an incredible way to learn what matters in life. We should all be so honored to sit in that space with a loved one, a friend. It gives insight to what matters in life. If you have your health, solid relationships in your life, and a connection with God or whatever your higher power is, you are so incredibly fortunate. When I was in my master's program, my second internship, so the second year I got placed at a hospital, I wanted to do the emergency room rotation. I don't know if I was trying to join the ranks of my mother, who is a retired emergency room nurse, and I wanted to see if I was capable of handling that hardcore aspect of life. And I remember the first time I saw a code come in. So somebody had gone into cardiac arrest outside the hospital and the ambulance brought them in. And I was following my supervisor, and I remember standing in the emergency department, and there was the gurney that the patient was on and that sterile, cold emergency room. It's machines, it's sounds, that beeping of the heart monitor, or the hearing the flatline. And standing there witnessing the team doing cardiac resuscitation and standing there with my supervisor. And we're standing behind this older gentleman who I'm guessing he was in his 80s. And he was standing there alone as the team worked on his wife. Watching a cardiac arrest, it's barbaric to watch a team of medical professionals work on a person to keep them alive. And when the doctors called the code and they pronounced the time of death for this woman, I remember just wanting to cry. And I also remember being in shock, feeling scared. I was sweating and just clammy and my heart racing, my mouth dry. Adrenaline's running through my veins as I'm watching this life end. And that man just standing there by himself. And again, I'm taking the lead of my supervisor. And the man, he had some tears running down his face. He wasn't hysterical by any means, just very somber. And I just remember not being able to help my tears from falling from my face. I was looking away from this man like I knew I shouldn't have been crying harder than he was. And that was the lesson that my supervisor gave me afterwards, is that after we helped this man and asked him, is there anyone we can call? And he just said no. And he just left, he just left the emergency room. I just remember processing that incident with my supervisor. And she told me, you cannot cry harder than the person who's going through it. And that made sense to me, the boundary as a social worker. Yeah, and I just remember as that man, that gentleman, as he walked away, his head down, hands in his pocket, and just walking out the doors, and him having nobody to call for support. I felt heartbroken for him. How in the world do you not have one person you can call? But then there was a contrast that I experienced, again, in the emergency room. And this man who came in, he was in his middle 50s. They were in the midst of a move, and this gentleman had a cardiac arrest as they were moving. Again, hearing the code being called over the emergency room, as soon as a code is called, the social worker who's covering the ER goes there. I follow my supervisor in, and we're standing there and watching the resuscitation efforts of the medical team. And again, just seeing how harsh and intense and full of effort and vigor and desperation to try to save somebody's life. And this was different. The contrast was different because this gentleman's wife and 3 adult children came in, young adults, but they were adults. And again, I'm on the side, I'm in the corner, I'm observing from the peripheral with my supervisor. seeing this man's wife and 3 adult children embracing, all 4 of them watching the medical professionals try to bring back to life their husband, their father. When the code and announced the time of death, just hearing the despair, the anguish, the shriek, the cry, the screams. But as we walk the family to the room where we bring the family in to process a situation or just have a private room for them to have those emotions that we're going to feel when we go through this horrific experience of suddenly losing a loved one. Bringing them in water and asking them who we can call. And I remember walking out the door and just seeing a swarm of people showing up. First, there were like 20 people. Before long, there were 40 people. Before long, that whole hallway was filled with people. And what a contrast between that gentleman who went home alone and had no one to call when his wife had died, and then seeing this community show up. And it hit me like a ton of bricks at that moment. The power of having a support system, people showing up. Don't ask, don't get permission. They were there. And just knowing at that moment, as being a social worker and helping people through their most difficult times in life, I can just rest better for the person going through this horrific time, knowing that they're going to have people to help them through their most difficult time. So what struck me after experiencing those 2 very different scenarios, seeing the example of having a community versus being isolated, knowing that, yes, this value that I have, this value of family and friends and community is something that is so vital. And we got to make time to build those connections, time to reach out, to create that community that we want, that we need as humans. We need that connection. And the reality is, we are going to go through hard times. That's inevitable. And so we have to develop that support system when things are well, when things are calm, to have that for when things go south, because they will. We got to be there when others need us. And in that way, hopefully, we have people who show up when we need them. So moving from my time being a social work intern, working at the hospital in the emergency room, and then moving into my first line of work once I graduated was going into hospice. What I learned from working in the emergency room is that I don't like dealing with sudden death, but I felt a calling. I felt a comfort in bringing awareness to the inevitable that all of us are going to experience. We are all going to die. As we continue to live, what we're going to experience more is people who we care about passing away. we need to start having conversations about what do we want the end of life to look like. And I remember this one woman. She was in a skilled nursing facility and she was passing away from dementia. And she had been on hospice for a long time. We're talking years. As long as she was my patient, she was never able to communicate, not one word. And there were times that I would call her adult son before I went and just said, I'm going to be there at such and such time. And this one time I walked in, her adult son was at her bedside. And he would always make sure her covers were up to her neck, that she was warm, and that her curtains were open, and that the sun was coming in. And there was even a bird feeder outside her window. Just so that the birds could come in and visit her. And maybe she had awareness of that. We would never know. I mean, he would ask me those tough questions like, how long can she exist like this? This is not living. And I would agree with him. And so one time when I went, we arranged a visit. As we were there, he was sitting up by her head and he had her all tucked in and cozy. And I was sitting down by her feet at the end of the bed. And I asked her adult son, I said, if there's anything that you could say to your mom and she could hear you and understand you, what would you say to your mom? He was like, oh my gosh, I would tell her that she was an incredible mother, that she cared for all of us kids so well. She worked so hard to provide well-cooked meals for us, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And he kept going on about what a wonderful mother she was and how she was present. And all of a sudden, as he's just going on, just without even stopping, no hesitation, he just went on for a consistent 5 minutes of just what a great mother she was. All of a sudden, I looked at her and I noticed her breathing change. And her breathing changed to a very slow, shallow pattern. And this pattern happens when somebody's getting ready to take their last final breath. And I said to her adult son, for the sake of the conversation, I will call her son John. And I said to John, John, look at your mom. Her breathing has changed. She is hearing everything that you are saying. And with that, he leaned in closer to his mother. And he kept continuing, Mom, thank you. You're an incredible mother. Thank you for everything you've given us. Mom, go be with Dad. It's okay. Go be with him. Thank you for everything. And he just leaned in and did that more. And within seconds, she took her final breath. That was an experience I will never forget. In hospice, we talk a lot about the patient, the person who is passing away, is going to wait for the perfect opportunity for them. It's about what they need to let go, not what we think they need to let go. It's so important that as you're ushering your loved one from this side of life to the other side of life, that we step in their shoes. What do they want? What's the music they want to hear? What would they need? And that was the first time I observed somebody hold on. She held on because she needed to hear those words. She needed that affirmation that her time on earth mattered. She just needed to hear that another time to let go. And so now I'm going to talk about a contrast experience that this was like an opportunity where I had to experience what I was preaching to my family members. Just like there is a birthing process, a series of patterns that somebody goes through to be born, there's a pattern and a series, a process of things, a series of things that need to happen for that person to let go and for the body to stop and enter the next spiritual realm. Working with families, I would say, you're not in charge of that. You don't have control over that. But the patient does. We have agency. We have autonomy over that when we're dying slowly on hospice. So when my grandfather was passing away, he lived in Iowa. He was in Iowa. And so I had to fly from California. And I wanted to go see him before he passed away. And I knew it was going to be close. I knew my time of arriving at his bedside and his time of dying was going to be very close. And because I had the experience of seeing hundreds of people go through the dying process on hospice, I didn't have pressure on myself of, you got to make it, you got to make it, you got to do this, you got to do that. It's a peace knowing that I just got to do what I'm doing. And if he needs me to be there, if he wants me to be there, if he needs that to let go, he will wait. Or if this is not what he needs, I'm not going to make it. And what a powerful exhale. I didn't have to stress. I didn't have to pressure. I didn't have to fight. I didn't have to take the absolute next flight, so to speak. But it was a calmness. So I was on a connecting flight and I landed in Chicago. And in that layover, I called my dad to check in to see how things were going. And when he answered the phone, I could tell that my dad was crying. And through his choked up voice, he said, "He's gone." And my response was, good for him. He let go. He went when he needed to go. I've read articles, I've read books, I've read stories, and I've talked to a lot of people now being a grief counselor, hearing a lot of people talk about that regret. I didn't make it. I didn't make it for my loved one. And just having to work through and sharing that story of it's about what that person needs and that we need to be okay with that it's about them. And when our time comes, if we're dying a hospice death, the same is going to be true for us. We can do end of life differently. As a culture, we need to embrace the inevitable. One of the things that I often heard when I would show up to a brand new hospice patient, they would share with me when I would ask them, what can I do to support you through this? How can I help you? Many times they would say, you need to help my family understand that I am ready to go, that it's not a giving up, stopping the chaos, stopping the panic, realizing that yes, time is precious, and lean into quality of life and not quantity of life. We can have calm that we can sit with, that we can create memories in the passing, whether memories of laughter and reminiscing and looking through the photo albums and sitting in that space of the inevitable. Everybody is going to die. And let's embrace that and learn from that and connect and feel and have despair, and then have that wonderful memory that is relived again. In the wisdom that we learn from death, that I've learned from end of life, working with the end of life, the wisdom that I've learned is that these feelings of being able to sit through the hard, we need to do that in our everyday challenges. We need to sit with the hard, sit in that space, connect, reminisce, reflect when it is a hard time. This is part of life. And instead of running to try to fix or solve or make it go away, to sit in that and really go inward and ask ourselves, what do you need? What do you need to get through this? And having the bravery to ask for help. Ask a friend, can you connect? Can we go out and meet? Can you give me a phone call? We don't get that insight and knowledge from running scared. We get that from sitting still. Thank you so much for listening to Broken, Adjust, Heal. I'm your host, Stephanie Schaefer. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about how to adjust to loss, learn to live with depression and anxiety, and cultivate resilience, you can find my group webinar programs, retreats, and more online at BeResilientInstitute.com. You can find a link in the show notes to my Facebook group, Be Resilient Institute. I invite you to join our community. This production was co-created by award-winning media midwife Ari Golden. You can find a link to her work in the show notes and on her website, www.arigolden.com. That's AHRIGOLDEN.com. Please join me next time as Broken, Adjust, Heal continues. Until then, take care of yourself one moment at a time.